Hello class! Today during Writer's Workshop we're going to work on improving our writing. Now that you all are such good writers, I want to take our writing to the next level. We are focusing on how to make our stories more interesting and more unique. So today we are going to discuss one way of doing that. Good writers sometimes use repeated words and phrases to tell their stories. In fact, many famous authors write books like this. I bet you know some of the kinds of books that we're talking about, because we've read some in class. I have some books already picked out for you, so let's see if we can find some repeated words and phrases so that we can learn more about how to use this in our writing. The first book that I have for you today is Your Mama a Llama? We remember that the baby llama tries to go and find her mama, and she asks all of her animal friends questions along the way. So, let's review what happens and see if we can find any of our repeated phrases in the book. The book begins with the llama asking his friend Dave, "Is your mama a llama?" I asked my friend Dave. "No, she is not," is the answer Dave gave. Then the llama goes on to her other friend and asks, "Is your mama a llama?" I asked my friend Fred. "No, she is not," is what Freddie said. He asked the same question again. "Is your mama a llama?" I asked my friend Jane. "No, she is not," Jane politely explained. The llama asked everyone the same question, but her animal friends did not answer it in the same way. So sometimes when we use repeated phrases, the text can use a question. We should write that on our anchor chart so we don't forget this and we can use it in our writing. Also, when you ask a question, sometimes that question, even though it's the same, can lead to a different answer. We find that in our book when all of the animal friends answered something differently. Also, when we are using repeated text, they can be told by different people. In this case, the llama is the main character, and he goes around asking all of his friends if his mama is a llama. So, sometimes the repeated text can be told by the main character. However, a question is not the only way that we can use a repeated text. In this other book that we've read before, it's called Love You Forever. And we remember that this is a story about a boy and his mom. And so, what happens in the book? Let's see if we can find any repeated phrases. When you hear something repeated, touch your nose. Love you forever. A mother held her new baby and very slowly rocked him back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And while she held him, she sang, "I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." And the baby grows up, and he's a lot bigger than he was before. He's growing up, and he's doing some things that aren't very good, and your mom would not be very happy if you did that, would you? If you put their watch in the toilet? However, the mommy goes on to say, while she rocked him and she sang, "I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." Whisper to your neighbor the repeated phrases that you heard. Yeah, I think I heard some of those too. However, this author decides to use almost a whole phrase whenever he's using a repeated text. He goes on to use 4 lines of repeated text throughout the book. So we should probably put that on our chart. So text can also use a repeated page. Throughout this story, we see that the boy continues to grow up and gets older and older. Then eventually, he gets so big, he becomes a grown-up himself and has his own child. And then whenever he gets old, he says to his newborn baby boy, "I'll love you forever, I'll like you for always, as long as I'm living, my baby you'll be." Isn't that the same thing that we just heard his mom say to him whenever he was little? Notice that the pictures are different, and it's showing a change in time because the boy is growing up and he becomes an adult. So a repeat can sometimes lead to a change in time. Also, whenever he's in here, he sings the same thing to his baby boy. So does that mean that an author can use different people to say the same thing? I think it does. So we should put that it can be told by different characters. And also, who's using the repeated text can change throughout the story, because at the beginning of the story, his mom was telling him the phrase that was repeated, and at the end of the story, he's the one that's saying the repeated phrase as well. In our final book, we have is The Napping House. Now, The Napping House is a story that is about different characters that are sleeping throughout the story. You remember this when you read it. Who tells the story? Because in the book, if you remember, all the characters are sleeping. So how do they talk? Whisper and tell your neighbor who it is that tells the story. The narrator, that's right. The narrator tells the story. So we can put that on who the repeated text can be told by. Let's see if we can find some repeated text in this story told by the narrator. There is a house, a napping house, where everyone is sleeping. And in that house, there is a bed, a cozy bed, in a napping house where everyone is sleeping. If you hear a repeated phrase, raise your hand. I see some hands going up. And on that bed, there is a granny, a snoring granny, on a cozy bed in a napping house where everyone is sleeping. Tell your neighbor what that repeated phrase is, since all of your hands are up. You're such good readers. That's right. I keep hearing in a napping house where everyone is sleeping. But they keep on adding on to the end of the story. And this is a repeated phrase. It's pretty much a repeated phrase. It's pretty much a sentence. So we can add that to our chart as text can use a repeated phrase. So the story goes on and on. Different animals seem to always be sleeping, and we keep on seeing that things are repeated. And we wonder what's going to happen if things are repeated all the time. You would think that the story would start to get boring. Do you think the story would get boring if you heard the same thing over and over and over again? Still sleeping. Oh, but then something else starts to happen. We see something different happening here at the beginning of this page. the text starts to change. We don't see the repeated phrase anymore. So it'll change and it'll lead to something different. Looks like the animals are starting to wake up. So that brings us to the last page where all the animals wake up, and it says, in a napping house where no one now is sleeping. That was a little bit different than the repeated phrase that we heard before. So sometimes the repeated text can change. And so whenever it changes, the repeated text goes out throughout the story, and it can lead to something different. So we should add that to our chart, as it can lead to a different ending. So let's remember that repeated phrases can use a question, a repeated page, a repeated phrase, and the text can also, it can lead to a similar situation, a change in time, or even a different ending. And also, the repeated text can be told by basically anyone, the main character, different characters, the narrator, or it can even change throughout the rest of the story. So now I want you all to think about your own stories that you're going to be writing during independent writing time. So let's try to use the repeated phrases if you feel comfortable, and be sure to write them down in your notebooks if you have a good idea in your head, because you don't want to forget it. So now, as we go back and start our independent reading, I want you to be thinking about these stories when I dismiss you. So if your birthday is January through March, you may go back to your seat. April through June, you may go back to your seat. July through September, and then October to December.